Today is December 19th, 2015. My name is Joe Todd. This is an interview with Edward Eugene Farmer in Dewey, Oklahoma. Sir, where were you born?
Dewey, Oklahoma.
Dewey, Oklahoma. When's your birthday?
September the 7th, 1929.
1929. Who was your father?
Edward Ray Farmer.
And your mother?
Edith Brennan Farmer.
Brennan Farmer.
Her maiden name was Mason.
Mason, okay. You said she lived to be 101 years old?
Right.
Did you go through school in Dewey?
Yes.
What year did you graduate?
1948.
1948.
Played on the state champs football team. We won 1947.
1947. In your school, who was your favorite teacher?
I guess Mrs. Fry.
Why was she your favorite?
I don't know, she had a good personality, and you could tease her.
What elementary school did you go to?
Well, I went 3 years in Dewey and then 4 years at Wayside.
Okay.
Then came back to Dewey.
Okay. What type of work did your father do?
He worked for cement plant. He was a repairman.
Oh, cement plant. When did that cement plant open? Do you know?
No, he came to Oklahoma in 1926. And he said during a depression, why he'd have to go out at midnight and stand in line, and they'd call off so many names, and if your name was called, you got to work, and if it didn't, well, you had to go home and then come back the next night. So it was 27,
Yeah.
somewhere in there.
Yeah. When did that cement plant close?
Oh,
I remember when it was open. Sometime in
I
the
don't know, it
60s.
was in the 50s.
Your daddy moved up here in 58, 56. Was he working there when he moved up here on the farm?
Yeah.
Was he working cement? He was working. Sure, no. Well, anyway,
Okay. Now, did you live in Dewey? You lived outside of Dewey?
We lived in Dewey, and then we moved out to 4 miles north, or 3 miles north and 2 east, and that's where we lived when the tornado come through and blew our house away.
What year was that?
42,
Okay.
May 2nd, 1942.
You remember that tornado?
Yes, I do.
Tell me about it.
Well, it was on a Saturday, and Wayside was getting ready for the county graduation in Bartlesville. And I was to sing a song in the graduation program, and we were practicing in the old Civic Center in Bartlesville. And we didn't know anything about it until we got finished practicing and started home, and we got up to the Dewey Cemetery, and we seen all wires and poles laying over and houses being torn up, and it was headed from there right towards where I lived, and I began to get scared. And people I was riding with, we drove up, and as soon as we got with it, kind of over a little mound, little road, hill in the road, I could see that our house was gone, and all there was just a bunch of trash around. And so I began to get kind of concerned about my mother, and got up there, and she was standing by the road, her and neighbors named Casto, and they went down below a BS pond, and they were of course covered with BS, but she was okay, and they were all okay. And then my sister came up, and she was scared to death. She was 4 years younger. And we walked around and looked at everything, and she was telling me, she said, "See that tree over there?" Said, I had been told that if a tornado hits, go get a hold of a tree, and said that's a tree I was going to get a hold of. And we looked over there, and there was a piece of tin wrapped completely around it, so it would have killed her if she'd have been there. But she was safe, and me and my sister had been in Bartlesville, and so we were safe, and my dad had been working, and he came home, or started home, and hit the the cemetery corner, and there's high lines down, and he just drove across them, and they hooked onto his car, and he drug them for a ways and broke loose and kept on driving, and he pulled in up there, and of course we all had a big reunion, and we walked out and looked around, and there was ducks walking around and chickens walking around that had feathers on one side and nothing on the other, and Daddy had put up a new fence around the yard of a hedge fence post, and they broke over just like matchsticks, and you can't break hedge with a tractor hardly. And so we looked around kind of in wonderment, and finally, well, they decided that somebody better go home, and so we went. My mother's sister had us all come down to their house, and we spent the night there.
You tell about your uniform that you was going to wear.
Oh, yeah, I was supposed to sing in the graduation. I was supposed to be a soldier, and so they bought me a brand new pair of khaki pants and shirt, and I found them, and you could hold them up and see completely through them. It just stripped all of the lint away from the thread, and they just looked like flour sack or a gunny sack or something. But we never found anything. They found a letter that was had our address on it up in Kansas somewhere that was 80-some miles away.
Did the tornado hit Dewey?
No.
Okay.
It came across from about Osage Park over the hills and hit just about a mile west of the cemetery, whatever road that is, and there was a swimming pool that they had called Linger Longer, concrete, and had bathhouses and change rooms, and it hit it, and there was a family named Nichols that lived over in that area, and they crawled into the house, and I heard that Mr. Nichols stuck his head out from under the house to see what was going on, and something hit him and killed him, and he was the only fatality in that whole thing that I know of.
Many injuries in the tornado?
No, that was the only one, just
Okay.
killed that one.
Yeah.
But everybody else evidently ran or got away or
Did
something.
you have any warning the tornado was coming?
No. No, they didn't have anything like that back then.
Tell about the man that saw your house go up.
Oh, yeah, Ernie Anderson lived exactly a mile north.
What's his name?
Ernie Anderson.
Ernie Anderson, yeah.
He said that he was out in his yard watching and seen the tornado coming, and said he looked down and he saw our house and said it just went straight up, whole, and got up so high in the air, and then all of a sudden it just exploded and fell. And he said then it just went all into whirling pieces and stuff. But our house, Don Tyler had owned that farm, and he had put a concrete roof on it. It was a square house with a triangular roof on it with a peak in it, with a chimney in the middle, and it was made out of concrete. It had chicken wire mashed in behind it, kind of like stucco. And we found that in our garden for 2 years afterward. We'd be out plowing the garden and you hit something, and pull it up and it'd be a piece of the roof where it slid it into the ground.
How long did it take to rebuild your house?
Well, Daddy bought a house and they moved it in.
Okay.
And so it didn't take too long.
Yeah, okay.
The first thing went back was a storm cellar. And we'd have bad weather come up and we'd run out to the cellar and there'd be maybe 4 or 5 cars out there. The neighbors crowded into the cellar.
Now, when did you move out there to the farm?
It must have been in about 38,
How large was the farm?
40 acres.
40.
Yeah.
What chores did you do on the farm?
Well, at that time, all I got to do was feed the chickens and pump water for cows. And then later on, as I got older, well, then I slopped the hogs. And Daddy sold milk to Page Milk Company, whole milk. So we had 8 cows. And I milked 3, and Mama milked 3, and Dad milked 2 because he was always taking care of the others. And then I'd take care of the calves as I would suckle them, bring them into the cows. And we always had hogs, so that's the first thing I'd done when I got in from school. We'd go out and slop the hogs and feed the chickens and pump water for the cows, and then get the cows up and be ready to milk when he got off at 5.
You have good water in the well?
Well, it was good and cold, but it had iron in it. And after it sat for a while, you'd get a rusty scum over the top of it. But cows liked it.
Yeah. What crops did you raise on the farm?
Well, the only time that we ever raised any was he raised some calf corn, and he bought a one-eyed mare named Nell, and he had a double shovel, and I was at the double shovel the corn.
And what's a double shovel?
It's well, they call it a Georgia stalk. It's got 2 little offset plows on it,
Okay.
and you can pull it with 1 horse.
Okay.
And it's to bust out the middles of the road.
Okay.
And I'd go down there and work with that horse, and that horse would walk sideways with her front feet on one row and her hind feet on the other. And I'd fight her all day long and just give completely out. And Daddy come in from work and come down and see that the corn was stomped down on the rows, and he'd get after me for that, and I'd say, Daddy, I can't get Nell to walk straight. And he'd get behind that plow and start her, and she'd walk just as straight down that row as you could get. But that's on the crop we raised. The rest of it was in pasture.
Yeah, okay. Where were you when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, December 7th?
Must have been there at home. Because I remember hearing about it, but I didn't know where it was at, or because of course then we only had a radio, and we didn't listen to it much except on weekdays. I'd listen to Captain Midnight and Jack Armstrong and some other program to listen to that. Mom would tell me that she'd go at the window and watch for Daddy come in, because they come on right, I think 4:30 or so, and I'd be in there to listen to the programs, and she'd watch them. And she seen Daddy come over the hill, she'd say, "Here he comes," and I'd run out and I'd start pumping water and start slopping the hogs and feeding the chickens and getting everything done.
Yeah.
But I guess we heard it on the radio.
After the war started, did you help with the scrap metal drives or rubber drives?
No, not that I remember.
Okay. Now, did you buy the stamps in school to buy war bonds?
No, I don't remember that either.
Did you discuss the war in school?
No, not that I can remember on that either. Only thing that I remember is it was rationing gasoline and tires and stuff. And
I was going to ask how did rationing affect you?
well, being that Daddy worked at the cement plant, that was considered essential work. And so he got, I forget, he got an A and a B and a C book. And there was so many gallons for each stamp. And he got enough to drive back and forth to work, and we lived 5 miles out. And then you had, I don't remember, you had some kind of stamp for tires, but you had to go in front of somebody and get approval to buy tires. And I remember who it was. He had to go in front of some kind of ration board or something. Only ration cigarettes. And he smoked. And the grocery store manager would, when he got his supply in, he'd hold back so many cigarettes for Daddy.
How about meat and coffee?
Oh yeah, meat and coffee. You could. Of course, we had hogs and we had plenty of pork, bacon and stuff like that. But any other kind of meat, well, you had to have stamps for that, and you had coffee stamps. I don't know what it's coffee, but there was so many stamps to buy groceries with. But Mama done that, and I didn't know anything about it.
So where were you when the war ended? The VJ Day. That was August 45.
I must have been at home. No, it was in August. I was probably baling hay. Because I went started working in the thrashing crew when I was 13. And after I worked a couple of years on the thrashing crew with the guy that owned the thrasher, why he had a baler, and he hired me to work for his baler.
Thank you.
So I worked for him every summer from then on.
How many men in a thrashing crew?
Well, it's flexible. Depending on how many. Most of them were either smelter workers or cement plant workers that take a few days off and they shared their work. So there'd probably be 8 or 10 bundle wagons, and that meant that there was about 8 or 10 pitchers loading the wagons. Then you had a tractor operator and a thrasher operator, and there's probably 15, 20 people.
Yeah. Now, do you know what kind of work the cement plant did for the war effort?
Yes, they, of course, supplied cement to different industries around. And the cement plant at the time only worked about 9 months out of the year. Because as soon as the ground froze and they couldn't pour cement while they shut it down, and then didn't start up until spring. So every winter, while the plant workers had to go out and chop wood or hire out to do any kind of pickup jobs they could do.
So what'd you do after high school?
I went to work for Mr. Tyler's little construction crew, Don Tyler's construction crew. And I was working out in the quarry right out here east of Dewey, building a concrete building. my job was to shovel sand and gravel into a ready mix that they had built out there. And I worked at that until I went into the Navy.
Now, when did you join the Navy?
August 10th, 1948.
Why did you join the Navy over the Army or the Marines?
Well, it was funny. I was working with these guys out there that were older men. One was a Navy vet, one was an Army man, and the other one I think was a Marine. No, his Air Force. And of all the stories that I heard, the Navy guy had more fun than anybody. So I thought, well, now that there, the other guy was, the Army guy was talking about sleeping in the mud and walking around carrying bags and stuff. And I thought, I don't want that. And the Air Force guy was talking about flying and was always afraid he was going to have to parachute out. And I thought, no, I don't want that either. So I picked the Navy.
Where'd you go for your boot camp?
San Diego.
San Diego. Tell me about your trip to San Diego.
That was an experience. I had never been out of Dewey except once before. I went to Oklahoma City to Boys State. And I didn't get to go anywhere. I just went down to the campus and stayed for a week and then came back. And so I had not seen any country. And I enlisted and they swore us in at Oklahoma City, and we got on a train. There's 11 of us from Oklahoma, and we got on a train that was coming from down south, and they all were from Georgia and Tennessee and Alabama with their southern drawl, and I had never heard anybody talk like that, and I didn't know these other guys from Oklahoma, but we'd sit there and listen to them talk, and we'd laugh and carry on. And it was the most fun experience I ever had.
How long did the trip take?
It seemed to me like it took about 2 days.
Where'd you sleep on the train?
Just there in the bed, in the seat.
In the seat?
Yeah.
How was the food on the train?
We didn't have any.
You didn't have any?
No. No, they'd pull us off to the siding and somebody would go buy a stick of bologna or a loaf of bread or something like that.
Now, when the train stopped, were you allowed to get off?
Well, I don't think we're supposed to, but if we're close to a town, somebody would. And another thing I had, there was an old boy, we called him Red, and he was an ex-Marine, and he was going back in. He'd been in World War II and tried civilian life, and he wasn't making it, so he was headed back out to the Marine base in San Diego. And he drank all the way out, and for some reason or other, he took a liking to me, and he butted up with me, and I'd listen to his tales. And we got to San Diego, and we got off the train. He went his way, and I went my way, and I went through boot camp, and we got found out later that he went to Camp Pendleton. And when the Navy got so far along, we had to take our rifle range, and we had to go out to Camp Pendleton to do all of our shooting. So we went out there, and I was standing in line, and they started to sign us. You go over here, and you do this, and you patch targets, and you get the ammunition up, and you get to shoot, and things like that. And I looked up, and there was this red-headed guy, and he was, of course, a sergeant. And he recognized me, and he said, "Hey, come over here." So I went over with him, and he said, "Have you shot yet?" And I said, "No, I haven't." And he said, "Well, let's get over and get your shooting done." So I went over, and he instructed me personally on how to get in all the different positions and everything. So I fired my rounds, how many I was supposed to fire. and done okay, made several bullseye, and he was satisfied with it. So he said, well, come with me, and I just followed them around the rest of the day and never had to do a thing.
What type of training did you have in boot camp?
The hardest training was for me to learn how to march. My stride was about 2 inches off, and I just, about every 10 steps, I was out of step. And my name didn't help. The chief who was in charge, he'd holler at me and say, Farmer, get back in step. You're not in the furrow now. And so I'd skip. I'd get back in step, and I'd take a few steps, and then I'd be out of step again, and he'd holler at me. It was almost impossible for me to learn how to march. I finally did, but, oh, it was hard. But we had marching and calisthenics, and I didn't have any problem with that because all I'd done when I was working out there building that building was use a shovel, shoveling sand and gravel, so I was tough as a boot. And so marching or calisthenics didn't bother me. And I weighed 155 when I went in, and when I graduated 13 weeks later, I weighed 185. So it was good for me. But we learned how to tie knots and different terminology, Navy terminology. And we had to pass swimming tests. And another thing we had to learn was how to roll our clothes and tie them. Because you didn't hang nothing, you just rolled it. And they had to, you take your shirts, your cambric shirt, and there's a certain way you folded it up, and then you started rolling it, and when you rolled it, it was about 2 inches in diameter and about 8 inches long, and you had little cotton ties that you tied on each end of it, and it had to be tight enough that when you dropped it, it bounced, and it had to bounce so high, and your dungarees that away, and your peacoat had to be folded a certain way. Your dress blues and undressed blues had to be folded a certain way. You didn't roll them because that'd wrinkle them. But you wore them, you put them on the wrong side out and put them under your bed and ironed them, kept them under your bed. And your whites, they had to be rolled. And if you failed what they called was bag inspection, where the chief would just throw your clothes out on the floor and everybody march over them. So you had to unroll them, rewash them, and you had to wash your own clothes. They had big tables out on the back, in the back of the barracks, and that's where everybody was out there washing their clothes. You had water and soap and everything, scrub brushes. And you got to stand watch. You got to stand the cubicle watch inside, and then you got clothesline watch. You went out and watched everybody's clothes because people would steal clothes off the line, and they'd hang them on ropes. Went up to a big mast, and they'd pull them up, and it looked like a bunch of flags all the way up the top of the mast on a rope. And when you wanted to get your clothes, while you went out and lowered the rope down, and you picked your clothes up. And most of you take your clean clothes off and put your wet ones back on and pull them up. And if you were lucky, somebody hadn't got out there and got your clean clothes and changed them for dirty clothes. That happened quite frequently, but you had to stand clothesline watch.
Did you go on bivouac?
No.
No.
Never left the barrack or the base.
Had you seen the ocean before?
No, I hadn't.
First time you saw the ocean, what'd you think?
Oh, I thought it was the most beautiful thing I ever seen, but an awful big pond. Because biggest thing I'd ever seen was ponds around here. And that's when they started instructing us in swimming. They said, "Can you swim 100 yards?" And I said, "I don't have any idea whether I can or not." And they said, "You got to be able to swim 100 yards." And I forget how many laps. It seemed like it was 5 laps or something in the pool. And they said, "We don't care how you swim it, just as long as you swim it." And I said, "I've never swum in a pond that's that big." So I said, "I don't know how far I can swim." And they said, "But you better be able to swim it or you'll have to go back and learn how to swim." So I dog paddled and flipped and flopped and finally got my distance in and passed the swimming test.
After boot camp, where'd you go?
I went to electrician's mate school there in San Diego. Well, to back up a little bit, when I was in Oklahoma City, I took tests at the recruiting center, and they graded me, and they said, you passed, done real good. You can pick any engineering school you want. And it was machinist, motor mech, boilermaker, and a couple others, and then electrician. And I thought, well, no, electrician's the only thing that I could think would be a good job to do when I got out. So I picked that. And out of a 160 man company, I was the only one that had a designated striker. I had a globe on my shoulders. The electrician, they have a round globe. And I went through, I was the only one. Everybody else was either a SA, seaman apprentice, or an FA, fireman apprentice. And I was the fireman apprentice electrician mate. And I was the only one in my company that had a designation, had a guaranteed school. So I went to school there in San Diego.
Tell me about the school.
Well, I thought I was pretty smart, and I'd done real good in math when I was in high school. And I got into electrician's mate school, and the first 2 weeks, or the first week, I was doing second year college math, and I'd never used a slide rule. And the problems they were giving us to do, you had to have a slide rule. So I had to learn how to use a slide rule. And I had a friend from Copan that was going through school 2 weeks ahead of me, and he came down and would tutor me when I'd run into problems. But as we advanced, well, I got word that people don't realize, they just go ahead and turn the light switch on and off. They don't realize what goes on to get that electric here. It's got to have a certain resistance or a capacitance in, and you can go along, you'll see a capacitor sitting on a post, and that's to change the power phase, get the power factor where it's right. Because if your power factor's down, well, it'll make a difference how much electric you get. It's just not strong enough to do what needs to be done. So we had to learn how to take a big long circuit and put the resistance and the capacity in it to keep it at a high power factor at the end of it to where it'd be efficient to work. And also, when you switch from one generator to the other, you got to learn how to start one up and get the phases to where that they're together, and the RPM is right, so that when you switch over, you don't get a kick or a surge. So it was pretty deep study, because during World War II, the people that graduated out of that school became second-class electricians, and we were still just out of boot camp.
What was the boy's name from Copan?
Earl Griffin.
Earl Griffin.
Yeah, he's dead now.
So how long did your electrician school last?
It was 18 weeks.
18 weeks. What's your most vivid memory of that school?
I think just how hard it was. And kind of made me realize that I wasn't nearly as smart as I thought I was.
Now, were you going to school to go on board ship?
Yes.
Now, does the ship, do they use AC or DC?
Well, World War One, they used DC. John, get me a
Yeah.
little mint. No, wait. Oh, yeah.
You said in World War One they used
Oh,
DC.
World War One was DC ships, and then the more modern fleet become AC.
Okay.
And so the only DC that we studied was submarines. We had a guy a chief that was on submarines, and so he taught us all about the submarine circuits and how they operated and such as that, because that was only DC that we worked with. But the rest of it was AC.
So from the electrician school, where'd you go?
Well, I went to Seattle and got assigned to a group that was going to the Aleutians. So I went up to Anchorage. We flew up to Anchorage and then spent the night in Kodiak. And the next day we went to Adak out in the Aleutian chain. And I'll tell you, from going from spit and polish at Recruit Naval Station to Adak was like going back to the Stone Ages. Got up there and there's all World War II Quonset huts, and there's all hills and valleys. And every place you went, you had to walk on wooden steps or sidewalks that went down or up or over a hill. And transportation was old school buses painted gray, navy gray. And you may want to go 2 or 3 blocks and it'd take you 30 minutes to get it because the roads were so curvy and round, and these drivers were like maniacs. It'd just scare you to death until you got used to it. But I got assigned to a ship repair unit at that, Finger Bay. And I was there for a short while, and they got up a crew that they sent over 16 miles away onto an island called Sidkin Island. And it had been and it was a naval refueling station. And it was operated by the Seabees. And Sitka had an active volcano on it. And it had a big tank farm. Lord, I don't know, must have been 30 big old tanks that's full of black oil, aviation gasoline, and diesel. And there'd be ships come in, mostly small ships would come in and we'd refuel them. And most of them took black oil, which was kind of like a liquefied coal or something. You had to heat it. And we had heaters and Chrysler pumps, and so they're supposed to give us a 48-hour notice before they come in, so we could go up and turn the heaters on and get the pumps and everything circulating, and get the oil warmed up so we could pump it down onto the pier and into the ship. And so that was our job. And I worked with a construction CB electrician. He was a pole jockey, and he could go up and down a pole faster than you could walk from one end to the other on the ground. He was best I ever saw. But we had generators down there. We had 4 Caterpillar diesel engine, and that was my job, was to keep them running. I'd run one of a night and then switch over, put them in phase and everything, and then shut one off and leave the other on. Let it run overnight, and then the morning go down and pick up another engine, and kept us with electricity. And then, of course, there's a World War II facility, and if they had any problems, well, I'd go out and help the electrician. I'd be his grunt. And so he started trying to teach me how to climb a pole, and I've got a picture of me climbing a pole, look like a monkey going up. But we'd work on keeping the island up, and our water supply was about 3 miles up in the hills. And I had a dam up there and a filter and pipelines, wooden pipelines that run water down to our barracks. And somebody had to go up there every day and check, because volcanic rock would whirl around and plug off the filter, and then we'd lose our water. So somebody had to do that every day, and it turned out that me and another guy was always the ones that done it. And we had to keep that going, and we had to keep checking for leaks on the tank farm. And then, in the meantime, while I was in the generator room taking care of the generators, and then he left. The CB guy got his tour out, and he came back home and left me there to take care of the pole climbing and everything. And so I had quite an experience with it. Mm-hmm. When we heard that communists had attacked, of course we hadn't heard where the communists were or who it was. So on the other side of our island was the Bering Strait. So they sent me up on top of one of our ridges with a pair of binoculars and a carbine and a .45, and I laid up there and watched the Bering Strait all night long. And your imagination can play all kind of tricks to you, because I'd be looking through binoculars and I'd see something that was kind of dark, and I'd think, oh, that's an invasion craft. And I'd watch it, and finally, it would turn white, and it'd just be a wave kind of capping off. So I stayed up there until I got back down, while they'd found out that it was over in Korea, and it wasn't Russia coming across there. So then I had to go along and black out everything, and we had street lights. Had big old mercury bulbs in them, and I had to either take them out, or I decided I'd unscrew them. And so I was just climbing up the pole, and they were about 40 foot high, and I was climbing up the pole, just hanging on and reaching up and unscrewing the bulb. Well, I'd done that on about 8 or 10 of them. And I got where I thought it was pretty good. And next to the last one, I got up there, and just as I reached up to get the bulb, my spikes come out, and I started falling down the pole, and I grabbed that, and slivers caught into my jacket and everything and caught me. And I like to burnt that pole in two of them spikes trying to get my feet settled in there. And so I climbed down and the rest of the way, and I was standing there and I was shaking all over, and then I remembered this lineman had told me, said, if you ever burn a pole, said, you got to get back on it. And so I went over to the next one, and I hooked my spikes in, and I took a step, hooked them in a couple of times more, and that put me about 680 feet off the ground. And I fastened my belt up, and I stood there and kind of shook it off. And finally I thought, well, now I got to get up. So I started climbing, but I used my belt that time. I went up like you're supposed to, and went up and finished loosened the bob and come back down. And that was my experience of burning the pole.
I'd like to ask, on Adak, was there anything left of the Japanese occupation?
No, not that I saw.
Okay.
One thing that the thing that is so memorable to me is we got there and they looked around and they said they had a sign over on one of the roads that said Adak Natural Forest. So it was during daylight, and we looked at Adak National Forest, and we looked all around, and you couldn't see a tree. And finally, we asked somebody, said, where's this forest at? So they pointed off over there, and it was all used Christmas trees that they'd stuck down. There's not any trees in the Aleutian chain. And so they'd made them a national forest out there with used Christmas trees.
So how long you on Sitcom Island?
Well, I was supposed to be there 18 months. The Army and Air Force had kept their guys there up 12 months, and they said that was long enough, you'd go rock happy. And Navy had 18 months. And then because of the Korean War breaking out and nobody not knowing what's going on, why, they froze us up there, and so I was up there 23 months. And then I came back to Seattle, and I was supposed to get leave and reassignment. And I got to Seattle receiving station there, and they dropped the leave and said reassignment. And so I hadn't been home since boot leave, so that was a little over 2 years. Well, right at 2 years since I'd been back home. But they shipped me to Treasure Island, and while we was waiting on the ship, I went through firefighting school for 2 weeks. And of course I had relatives living out in California, so I got to visit them for 2 weeks while I was out there, every night. And then I got put on a ship. Let's see, anyway, it was a World War I ship, and it was a DC ship. And Dad told me that when you get aboard ship, one like that, it's a volunteer for the crew. So they come around and ask for volunteers, and so I volunteered to work with the crew. And I went down to the electric shop, and I don't know how many soldiers they had on that. Oh, General Heinzelman. And anyway, the fan motors were all bad on them, and these guys down 5 or 6 decks down was suffocating down there. They didn't have any air circulating at all. So that was my job, was to go down there and pull these motors out, bring them up and clean them up, and put new brushes in them and get them operating, and then take them back down. And I think I was one of the most popular guys on ship, because they'd call me and I'd go down and pull the motor out, or sometimes I could just look at it and see the brushes are worn out, and I'd replace them. And man, they was so thankful that they was getting air down in there. But it was just, well, Walter Winchell had been on the radio he'd run it off the Atlantic, and he was trying to get it to be scrapped, pulled off the sea. And the Maritime had kept using it in the Pacific, and so it was just a junk pile. Nothing worked on it, and it was operated by civilians, and they didn't care. It was all dirty, and being a DC, the motors are black and cruddy and dirty, and so it kept me busy getting motors to work so they could have fan circulation. And one of the electricians come up and asked me, he said, you know anything about motors? And I said, well, no, not really. I said, I'm an electrician. And he said, well, our lifeboats need to be checked out, the motors in them. So they haven't been started in a long time. And so I said, well, what kind of motors are they? And he said, well, 4-cylinder motors. And I said, well, I kept a Model A running. Maybe I can find out something that I can do on that. So I got up on the lifeboats and started draining them and cleaning the gasoline up and getting them all fixed up. And finally I got where that I could get all of them, the motors would run, but I couldn't get the gas lines and gas tanks all cleaned out real good, so it didn't run very long. But after we got over to Japan, well, I got thinking that, man, that'd been an awful thing if we'd had a problem and had to go in them lifeboats, because you'd just been wallering around out there in a small lifeboat instead of on a big ship.
Now, where'd the ship go when you were on?
It went to Japan.
To Japan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Went to Yokosuka, Japan. And then I got unloaded from that and went over to another ship that was back stern in. That was a housing, it was a berth ship. That's where people with transit comes in and stayed there until they got assigned to a division or something. And it was George W. Weeks. And I stayed on that, I don't know, probably a couple of weeks, and then I got assigned to Harbor Master Boat Pool there in Yokosuka.
Now, what's a harbor boat pool?
Well, Harbor Master is the one that supplies boats for all the ships that need boats, and they supply patrol craft. And actually, they're just a hauling service. They either send out boats to take liberty parties to shore, or they'll take supplies out, and or they'll run patrols out with patrol the harbor, and they just supply all the boats for the harbor. And, first night I stood watch. I found out that I was the only regular Navy electrician, petty officer, that was assigned to the harbor master. All the others were either reservists or had been kicked out of other things, and this was their last chance to straighten up, or they're going to either get a BCD or brig time. And so they weren't very nice people. And did you say you was in the reserve? Well, the naval reserves that I served with, they all outrated me. But they didn't know beans, and the guys wouldn't work for them.
Hold on just a second. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, the reserves would come up and say, "Farmer, would you get so-and-so to work, do this or do that. And I'd tell them, I said, well, you outrank me. You're getting paid for the job, go out and make them do it yourself. Because they were Jap electricians,
Yeah.
Jap workers. And they'd say, well, they won't do anything for me. Well, I found out real quick, this was occupational force. And if you wanted anything done, you picked out one that was kind of the leader. And you'd send him by himself off to do a job. And if he was respected enough, they wouldn't let him do it. There'd be 3 or 4 others go along and do his work for him. Well, in my section, I had a guy that had been an engineer on a submarine. So he was very highly rated. And he he did not work. So whenever I had a job to do, I'd say, well, you go over and take care of that. And so just as soon as he left, well, there'd be 4 or 5 go in right with him. And he'd stand around because he was a gentleman and an officer. And so I learned real quick how to play the Japanese. And but anyway, get back to the reserve bit. I had one electrician that was a second-class electrician, and he had been in reserve. I don't think he'd ever actually been in active service, but he had run a little electric shop of repairing lamps, and that was a totally experience of electrical work that he had. And he was an older guy, and we all called him Pappy. But Pappy come over and he'd say, Ed, would you go over and get so-and-so done? And I'd say, no, Pappy, that's your job. You're second class, get it done. And he'd say, well, they just won't do it. So, anyway, I kind of took him under my wing, got his work done for him. But I had my first night on watch. I got a call on the phone, and well, they had a dispatcher, and he answered the phone for if they needed a boat to pick up a Liberty party, or if they needed to schedule one for the next day to haul supplies to a certain ship, or pick up something and bring it in, or whatever. And so the phone rang, and I answered it. And there was a guy said, is this Farmer? And I said, yes, it is. Said, well, he told me his name. And I said, I don't think I know you. And he said, well, I know you. I said, well, that's nice. And he said, I want to meet you after you get off watch. And I said, oh, what for? He said, I just want to meet you down on the pier. And I said, okay, what we're going to do? And he said, well, we'll find out after you get down there. So when I got off watch, well, I went over to my locker and I pulled out got my lineman's pliers, about that long, dikes, stuck in my back pocket. And I went down on the pier by the light, and I waited and waited and waited, and nobody showed up. So finally I left and went back up to barracks and went to bed, and next morning when we had muster, of course, engineering was in one part and Siemens was in the other, and I knew that I hadn't heard the name in engineering, so listened for the name, and finally heard it over in the Siemens group, and after they dismissed, I walked over and asked him what his name was, and he told me. He's the biggest guy I ever seen. He was standing about 6'6" and probably weighed 250 pounds, great big old kid. And I said, you called me last night? And he said, grinned and said, yeah, I did. And I said, you didn't show up. And he said, yeah, I did. And I said, no, you didn't. He said, yeah. Said, I was watching you. And I said, you didn't look very close, did you? And he said, no, why? And I said, did you see what I had in my pocket? He said, no. I said, well, if you had, you'd have been scared, because I said, I pulled out these pliers and I showed them to him, and I said, as big as you are, I said, I'd have hit you right between the running lights, and when I got you down to my size, I'd have beat you severely. And he just laughed.
Sorry about that.
He just laughed and kind of laughed it off, and I said, well, now you don't threaten me anymore. Well, you know, he turned out to where that I was his mentor. He had been was in for a BCD. And he just straightened up and really became good hand.
Mm-hmm. So how long were you in Japan?
Shut it off.
Okay, sure. So how long were you in Japan?
I was in Japan 14 months. And I put in for a request to come back home for leave and reassignment, because it'd been a little over 3 years since I'd been home. So finally, well, it came through, and I came back, and they I had accumulated 62 days leave. And when I got back to the States, well, they said anything over 30 days you lose. And I said, well, that ain't right. It wasn't my fault I couldn't come back. So they said, well, that's a rule now. They've changed it. You can't accumulate all that leave anymore. So I came back for 30 days leave. And saw her. Saw my wife at a basketball game. And kind of like what I saw. So we went to a sock hop. And they had a broom dance, and where this single one works with dances with a broom, and then you try to get pass this broom off to somebody else so you can dance with them. And they'd pass it off to me, and I'd just ignore them. Never let anybody else dance with her that night.
That's enough.
But anyway,
What's your wife's name?
Joanne,
Joanne.
no middle name. Joanne Robertson.
Where'd you meet her?
There at Dewey.
In Dewey.
Basketball game. And
I was head cheerleader.
Head cheerleader.
I went back to San Diego and got assigned to the USS Celerities, and it was in mothballs. So I put it in, helped put it in commission.
What kind of ship is the Laertes?
It's a auxiliary repair. It goes out and just gets in a location and sits there, and then ships come in and bring their needs in, and we take care of it.
When do you assign the Laertes?
It must have been 51. Because we got it in operating condition, but we hadn't had sea trials yet. And I was in charge of the inside electrical shop, repair shop. And we had an outside crew to go out and pull generators or motors or whatever they needed repair from the different ships and then bring it in. And we had a big hatch that we could drop stuff down. And the biggest motor that I can ever remember working on was brought in from a carrier. And I don't know what it done, but it was big enough that you could, just by bending over a little bit, you could walk through it, through the casing. And so we went in and repaired it and got it operating, sent it back out, and our repair officer was a full commander, and for some reason or other, well, he took a liking to me, and he come in one day and said, how'd you like to go to Annapolis? And I said, well, I had never thought anything about it. He said, well, we got openings and there's going to be a test for Annapolis, so I said, I think you'd make a good officer. So he said, I said, well, I don't have any education, and I said, I can't do anything like that. And he said, yeah, I'll help you. So anyway, I took the test with his help, and I passed it. Well, they take, it seemed me like it's either 10 or 11 out of the fleet each year to go to Annapolis. And I ended up being second alternate, so I never did get a chance to go to Annapolis. But I often thought after it, I had better than 3 years in, and I don't know how I do to get in there and have somebody that just had 3 years of college or something like that jumping all over me and tell me what to do. So I never got to go. But anyway, I started, he offered me a job when I got out. He knew that I didn't have long before I got out. He offered me a job in his boat repair unit in Long Beach. And I was going to make good money, even today's wages. And I turned him down because I said, I want to get back to Dewey. I can't hardly wait to get back to Dewey. So I came on, got this, well, when I get
Where was the Laertes based when they brought the ships in for repair?
in Sasebo,
Is that Sasebo, Japan?
Japan.
Yeah, okay. Now, did you get off the Korean coast?
No,
Okay.
no,
So
no, it was never close to Korea.
how long were you in Sasebo?
I never was in Sasebo. It's where the ship went after I got off.
Oh, that's after you got off.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it went to Oakland for sea trials and loaded up with supplies. Came back to San Diego and stayed there for a while, and then it went to Sasebo.
and how long you were on the Laertes?
Oh, probably 8 months.
Okay. Where were your quarters on the Laertes?
Well, it was first deck down. Here was the hatch that went down into our shop. So it would have been right in here about midship, the first deck down. You just went down
Okay, let's see. This is the hatch right here, so you about here, first deck down with your quarters. Okay. What was your average day on the Laertes? What'd you do?
Well, it was kind of like going to work at a regular job. Of course, after we'd have our breakfast, well, we'd go in and report in and muster in and see who was there and if everybody's on time. And if anybody had to make sick call, then I'd go into the repair office and pick up work orders and find out what work we had to do that day. And then I'd assign different ones to do different jobs. And then I just kind of supervise and help them as they needed it. And then of an evening, we'd secure the shop, go for a meal, and then we didn't, our group never had to stand watches. So if you had liberty, you had liberty every other day. So you stayed aboard ship while you'd go and read or go to bed early or whatever. And if you had liberty, well then you'd take off and you had to be back in at midnight. So kind of dull and routine.
Where's your general quarters on the Laertes?
Didn't have any.
You didn't have any?
No. Didn't have any, I don't think they had any armament. I don't remember ever seeing any armament.
Did you have a place to abandon ship?
Well, we there in our work area, we had life jackets, and then they had, for want of a better name, as those rafts, those solid type rafts that you could push off and jump in them, and that was the only thing that we never did drill or didn't have anything like that.
So when were you discharged?
March of '52.
What'd you do after you were discharged?
I'd been discharged about 2 weeks and I got nervous. I had never been unemployed. So I went out and put my application in Phillips at the research center. Well, I went to personnel, and the personnel man sent me to the research center, and I went out and talked to the people out at the research center and stayed until about noon. And I told them, I said, well, I'm going to go home. And they said, well, you got to be back in an hour. And I said, why? And they said, well, you're working. And I said, no, I just come out for an interview. And they said, no, you've been on the clock ever since you come up. So I went to work within 2 weeks after I got discharged.
What'd you do at the research center?
Well, I started out as a mechanic, pipe fitter, insulator. Then I transferred over into the instrument shop and was in there for several years, and an opening come for the radiation lab, and then I got that job, and I went up and operated in the 60s a electronic
I just call it linear.
linear accelerator that made high voltage electrons and radiation. And
Was this at the research center?
research center. Yeah, we had a building that had 8-foot walls, concrete walls around it, and laid specially so that there was no cracks anywhere it went through. And the door on my chamber was 47 ton, run on a railroad track, and I operated it by remote control and had a closed television circuit watching it inside. And we operated making high radiation to chemical studies, and worked a lot with Idaho Falls. And then we had a group out there that they were trying to use the radiation to vulcanize rubber to metal, and just all kinds of trying to find uses for radiation. And then I worked on that until they shut it down, and then went over and started working in the chemical lab. I was a senior lab technician. And I worked there until I retired in
And when did they shut that down at the research center?
Oh, it was in the late 70s.
Yeah, because you retired in '85, yeah.
Yeah, they shut it down, and then I don't know when they tore it down. They tore the building down. It's no longer out there.
So you retired what year?
85.
1985. What have you been doing since you retired?
Well, I work for a city today, mowing grass and spraying for mosquitoes. Then I went to work for an electrician, worked for him for 5 years. And then I worked for Walmart for 3 years, and then since then I've not done anything.
What'd you do at Walmart?
Well, worked in lube oil, changing oil in cars.
Would you join the Navy again?
In an instant.
I'd like to do a word association. I'll give you some words if you give me your reaction.
Okay.
First one is boot camp.
Yeah, different.
Alaska.
Cold.
Yokosuka, Japan.
I don't know. It was an enjoyable place to be, but I didn't realize that Japan got so cold.
USS Laertes.
Enjoyable place to work.
Harry Truman.
I liked Harry, but he made me stay an extra year. I went in for 3 years and had to stay almost 4.
Why?
Because he extended everybody for a year.
When was that?
During the Korean War, it must have been in '51.
Okay.
I went in what they call a minority cruise. You're supposed to go in until you was 21. It's been 3 years. And he extended me a year. But I didn't dislike him because I enjoyed the Navy.
Dwight Eisenhower.
I think a great man.
Korea.
I think a waste.
How do you want to be remembered?
I don't know, as a good father and a good man, a God-fearing man.
Anything else you want to talk about?
No, I can't think of you. You?
Go look at me.
Well, sir, this is an excellent interview.
Well, thank you.
I want to thank you for your service and thank you for the interview. And again, this is December 19th, 2015. My name is Joe Todd. This has been an interview with Edward Eugene Farmer in Dewey, Oklahoma. Thank you.